Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to What's Up With That, the show that brings you interesting people, issues, cultures, and subcultures here in the Santa Clara County and beyond. Tonight, our topic is sex and intimacy with seniors. And here to talk about it with me are my guests. First of all, this is Dr. Phyllis Sturges. She chairs the Aging Specialist Program, College of Social Work at San Jose State University. And my second guest is Vivian Silva. She has a master's in social work, and she also specializes in aging. Hey, what's up with that? First of all, to start off, I would like to talk about the idea of sexuality and seniors in society. There's a lot of misperceptions, there's a lot of confusion, and I think people want some straight answers. I can only say from my own experience that I sometimes have been misled to the idea that seniors don't engage in sexuality. They don't engage in intimacy. They get to a certain point in their life where they just say, you know, it's time, like there's some kind of maybe biological clock that rings that tells them no. And I've come to learn that that really isn't the truth. And I think that there's a lot to be said and a lot to be learned. So we're going to start off with a question for Dr. Sturges. And Dr. Sturges, how does society feel about sex in the elderly? It's a big issue. How do they feel about their parents having sex or their whatever? What, from your experience?
Well, I think that it's variable, of course. I mean, people have different views, but I think you could say in general that there tends to be the idea, since we're such a youth-oriented culture, that people become sexless when they become old, 65, 70, 75, and 80. And that's really not true. A lot of it depends on the degree to which an older person kind of internalizes that stereotype. If they believe it, they're more likely to go along with that than if they tend to do their own thing.
And how does this affect the seniors? Are the seniors affected by this stereotype?
Well, I think so, but then again, it depends on the cohort. I mean, it depends. I think people that are in their 80s and 90s would be more affected by it than people in their 50s and 60s now, and I think in the future we're going to see that the baby boomers are going to be far less affected by this kind of stereotype than later. But I think the other thing that we have to say about this is that some people would like to be sexually active and don't have partners. And this is especially true for women. So that's really an issue not of whether people feel they should or not, but whether they have the opportunity to or not. Because so many people are widowed and don't have the opportunity.
So are there places that they can go to, or what do they do to compensate for this? I mean,
in terms of sexuality?
In terms of sexuality.
Well, I remember the person that really educated me on this topic was when I was at the University of Washington and was learning about gerontology. This was quite a while ago, and I was in a seminar, and we had a woman who was 75 years old come in, and she lived in senior housing, and she said to me, well, she said to all of us that she had a series of love affairs, and that she would go out with some older man, and then she would invite him up to her apartment, and
were the
she
people
would
just like, ah, my God, what are you talking about?
Yes.
You just like,
well, this is why they invited her, to break down our stereotypes. So, and then she would invite them in, and then she would put some music on, and she would ask them to dance. And it feels like yesterday. It was probably 20 years ago when I heard this story. And she would ask them to dance, and they would dance, and that would sort of set the scene. And then they would have sex. And that she was not a beautiful woman or anything like that, but she was very vital, very zestful, and she was really enjoying all these love affairs. And it just sort of blasted all our stereotypes. So there are people like that, but not everybody's like that or wants to be like that.
Do you think that seniors find other seniors sexually attractive?
Yes. What do you think?
I would say yes. People get married in their 70s, 80s, and there's got to be an attraction.
Because, you know, there's this thing that you always, like a stigma I hear, or I don't even know if it's a stigma, but you say, oh, he's got himself a younger lady. And maybe that's a man thing, you know? Look at that guy, his wife, he's separated from his wife or something, he's got some little spring chick and they're getting it on, or whatever, you know? And is this more the non-norm, or is this completely, is this have something greater? Does the society expect a man to continue to prove his manhood? And there's a big issue here that I guess I'm trying to get at, and it's the male-female difference here and the way that they approach sexuality, and particularly as elders. What happens? Is there...
Well, this is one of the issues around availability. In other words, yes, a lot of men like to marry women younger, or have sexual partners that are younger than they are, and frequently they do. And this means that women their own age then don't have the opportunity. So that's one of the issues around opportunity. However, increasingly, women are having liaisons with younger men, and I think we'll see that more in the future, and also with people their own age.
And it'll be really interesting to see the reactions to that, you know, because again, then you have this perception of the older lady that's got the young, like, I don't know, escort. I don't know. You know, there's so much. The media plays so much into all of this, and the media has really not given senior issues a fair shake at all. Myself being a theater arts major and a filmmaker, I'm tired, actually. I'm sick and tired, to be honest with you, of seeing the senior coming up here, and I find in filmmaking, you know, they find these people, you know, that are in their 40s or 50s, and even worse in the theater, and their 20s and the 30s, playing, you know, an 80 or 90-year-old person and almost mocking it. And the crowd expecting them to mock it because that's the way that they perceive it. So when you take it on to sexuality, it's like, oh my God, you know, what's up with that? You know?
Well, I think in our society, as men age, there is sort of I think a stereotype that if an older man is interested in sex, then he's a dirty old man.
Exactly.
And I don't think that's fair. You know, you don't hear much about women and, you know, the what they might be called or thought of. But I know that when you see a younger man with an older woman in a restaurant, people pay attention. Oh, yeah. Heads turn and tongues wag. And I've seen that. So, you know, there's just...
and what are they thinking, really, to themselves? You know, it's kind of...
Well, I've heard, you know, gold digger.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, that the young man may be looking for some money, a lonely
Which is exactly why I said the escort kind of thing. And I mean, it's so funny that shows like The Love Boat. I mean, let's go back to The Love Boat. Was probably the worst abuser of situations like that, because that, and yet that was funny to people. That was very funny. Why?
Well, but you see, this is all ageism. I mean, if we did this, if we had racist jokes like this and sexist jokes like this, people would be raising Cain. But it's okay to do this to old people.
And why is that?
Well, because
What's up with that?
I mean, we just simply haven't grown up on that issue yet. I mean, we haven't gotten there yet on that issue. But the last taboo subject, I mean, we can talk about everything about older people, but the one thing we never talk about is sexuality.
Well, then here's the ultimate question. How important is sex for the elderly?
It depends on the individual. I mean, you simply cannot generalize. I mean, for some people, it's not important. For other people, it's very important. For some people, it's very important, but they don't have the opportunity. Some people are heterosexual, some people are homosexual, some people are bisexual. Old people are just like anybody else. And they're more varied at the end of their lives, research has showed, than at any other time. So
maybe you could also address the same question from your own experience. I know that you do groups that are where you talk about sex. And what has been the reaction, and how interested are these people in this?
Well, I think some interesting points I can share with you is that the women's group that I have conducted in the last 4 years, the most attendance was when it was sexuality. So that was the topic. We had the most, and they asked for an encore. And so I thought that was very significant. And if you really look around in the community, rarely do you find topics, seminars on sexuality and aging. You might find sexuality pertaining to medical issues.
Right, and how would they advertise this,
that medications, affect one's, performance possibly, or interest in sex, or depression.
And, and that's a very ageist, even just to see that in a newspaper. We're doing a study on, the elderly and performance kinds of thing, and it's just a vamping of this whole kind of thing. But anyways, I just had to add that, but continue on.
Okay, so, well, that's a point I thought that should be mentioned. Also, when I've worked with seniors that were divorced or separated, an interesting point that comes up is I was looking for experts as well to speak on the topic, and it was hard to find one that was really geared to working with seniors or have information regarding seniors. So we asked one to speak, and I was a bit offended because the context was satisfying sex, or the ideal sex is when you have a loving partner. And the reality is, which to the group I was working with, is marriage. I mean, sex and marriage sort of went along with this cohort, and I was offended in that someone is or has been married 40 years, 35 years, and all of a sudden they're single. The trauma not only of being alone, but of wondering where do they find an opportunity to continue a life of sensuality. I mean, it's part of being a whole person.
Right.
And so I found that to just specifically say that that's the best sex, I thought it's already giving people an opportunity to feel more guilty if they've had a strong religious background that says sex and marriage have to go together. Sex has to go with marriage.
Right.
So the next time we did a group, I decided to do it. And I wanted to just be more open and give all kinds of alternatives regarding masturbation as an opportunity, regarding same sex as an opportunity. Not saying we were condoning or suggesting, but just sort of opening up the world.
Right.
And I got very little feedback from my presentation, and so I thought, I bombed. I should have looked harder in the community for that expert. And so when the evaluations came back, the last class we went through the evaluations and asked, for not only the written feedback, but verbal. And that was one of the most desired topic, and that they wanted more information regarding sexuality. And I said, well, I would have thought by the reaction that I did not do a good job of presenting the topic.
Right.
And someone said, no, it's just that when you've been married 35 years and you can't talk to your own husband about sex, how can you talk about it in a group of strangers? So the point being, sex is not talked about. Even sometimes in a relationship for 30, 40 years, there was not a comfort zone about talking about sexuality.
So that must make it very, very difficult for the person who is single, who is still interested in sexuality, to, where do they go? I mean, they go to a bar, and it's like there's a whole new set of presumptions and things that play into it.
People aren't likely to go to bars.
Yeah, so where do they go?
Single bars. Senior centers. It's a good place to meet people, or hiking groups, or any kind of interest groups, travel. Lots of things like that. But one thing I think that one of the students reminded me of after class today, I told her I was going to come and do this, and she does AIDS education. And she was saying, remember to mention that the rate of AIDS is up among older people, and we're seeing a lot more older people than we used to. So if people are going to be experimenting, they'd better practice safe sex.
Yeah, you know, that was, it's so funny, that was, it was a question that we had discussed prior to the show, and I was wondering, how would somebody get the word out about safe sex to the elderly? Do you go in and, I mean...
Given her comments.
Yeah, I mean, what I have, my experience particularly in safe sex demonstrations, I mean, to take this to its extreme, is the Department of Health comes in, and if we're talking about people who won't even talk about sex, right? Or, you know, or maybe want to, but they aren't able to, and you have a person that comes from the Department of Health, and he places a phallic thing, there it is, okay, and gives them a demonstration. I mean, I'm trying to, from what my experience, and again, I've worked with the seniors for 8 years, my experience would be kind of a very uncomfortable sort of situation. So it would seem to me that it might be real difficult to teach them about safe sex, because
that's a good point.
Is there an attitude maybe at that age that, well, I've done it all, I've been through it, I know what I'm doing?
It depends on the individual. But I mean, I did think her point was a very good one, and I said thank you very much for reminding me, because I might not have thought about it. Because the fact is that you just never know.
Right. Of course you don't know.
You don't know.
But I also think there would be a denial, just like teenagers don't think they'll ever get in an accident when they're driving and drinking. I think the same thing for, you know, an older population that has not maybe had this liberated free sex of the 60s and would not think, well, it's not going to happen to me.
Right.
You know, would deny that it could happen to them.
One thing that when I was talking to this with some of my research staff is we kept, and this is my problem, you know, or probably a lot of people my age have this idea that when you think about my parents or seniors having sex, is like this kind of, you know, it's there. I mean, I can't deny it. And I'm wondering if this affects a senior's response to going out and trying to find a sexual partner. Are they very much aware of this? Are they aware that society has placed some kind, I mean, I'm sure this is an open-ended question looking for a great answer, so give it to me.
I think if you're talking about the female population, believe me, all females, all ages are aware that there is a certain image presented in the media to being attractive, to being desirable.
To being young.
To being young. So it's contrary to, you know, an older woman's, I mean, where do you get the support and the feedback saying it's okay to do this or that you are attractive, except for, you know, role models. And the role models, I'm not sure, are even appropriate. You know, Jane Fonda exercising all the time and having trainers. A lot of people don't have personal trainers to keep their bodies intact.
People don't have the money.
But on the other side, I think as women age, and I know studies shown that actually women really come into their own sexually as they age, and they may be more comfortable with themselves.
Okay, now, when you're talking about that, there's a big, of course, issue that happens in the woman's life. She goes through menopause, okay? Menopause, she's no longer has to worry about getting pregnant. Is this liberating, or does this mean anything?
Well, I think what we're not saying, though, is that men also change.
Well, yes. Yes.
And their sexuality changes, too.
Right.
And in fact, this is one reason couples don't continue sexual relationships in old age, is sometimes because for various health reasons or other reasons, men can't perform the way
Right.
they used to. And sometimes the wives want to continue and the men can't. But there are some things postmenopausally that are important for women to know. And I think we're getting back to something that we really haven't said, but we've been getting around, and that is that there's just a lot of specialized information.
Right.
I mean, about this taboo subject that people don't know,
Right.
are afraid to ask, and that a lot of people, like doctors and nurses and social workers and everybody else, doesn't tell them, like how to practice safe sex, the fact of changes after menopause that might
Right.
require lubrication, about changes that happen to men, for example, with prostate difficulties,
Right.
cardiac conditions. I mean, there's a lot of very, very good specialized information that people need in relation to their sexuality, and they're afraid to ask, and medical people don't think to tell them because they're sexless.
Right. And senseless sometimes.
Yeah, and they don't think about it. And the fact is, it would just make an awful lot of difference for a lot of people. And that's why I think it is a really good subject to talk about.
And a very difficult subject to talk about.
And then there's a question of why it's so difficult to
Right.
talk about.
Why is it so difficult to talk about in
Well,
your opinion?
because of the difficulty that children and adults have at every age of even thinking about their parents having sex together.
Right.
It's unconsciously aversive. And if you
And yet
don't...
they come from a family of 25 kids.
I
and
know.
They
I
just
mean,
came from somewhere.
But if you've ever been a parent and ever... I mean, I've heard people say, try to discuss anything like that with their children will say, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to...
Yeah,
don't talk
exactly.
about that.
Exactly.
And it's a taboo subject, and we're not sure exactly why that is, but it is. And so I think that feeds into the stereotype of sexlessness, because this
So
is what people need to feel. So if they feel this way about their parents, they're going to tend to feel this way about all older people.
They just generalize. The idea of intimacy, okay? You get married, there's a lot of sex. As you grow older, I feel you tend to get to be more like mates and good friends, and intimacy probably becomes much more important. And especially if you are, as you said, incapable, or you do no longer function like you used to, what do they replace that with? Is there more touching? Is there more cuddling? Is there less this or that, or what's it all about?
Well, I would say in the groups that I've worked with, in the differences discussing between men and women, the men would rate very high the intercourse itself, the act.
Right.
And the women were looking a lot for the touching, the cuddling, the respect, or the sharing. But I think as couples age, if they have a good relationship, that can deepen. And communication, I think, is the key, no matter what age you are, to understanding and being able to ask for your needs to be met, and saying what you want.
Yeah, but we're assuming that everybody has these long-term marriages. I mean, everybody doesn't. I mean,
Right.
some people get married when they're 65 or 75 or 80 and have passionate, incredible time.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah,
we
it's
just
true.
cannot generalize.
Right. Oh, I know, and it's impossible to generalize on anything
Yeah,
at all.
as personal as that. I mean, everybody has a different pattern.
Right. How about the senior who has just lost a mate? What, there's a lot of emotional problems. What would you advise them to do? What would you tell them if they were to come to you and say, listen, I don't know what I'm going to do? And I'm sure it's a very drastic thing, especially if it's a long-term relationship. I need to be with people. And for men who will probably more likely to be that way because they have not created the circle of friends that females generally do. What do they do? I mean, what's up with that? Where do they go?
Well,
because we have this whole male thing too, where males generally don't communicate on the same personal level. You know, there's a thing in society that says, you know, a man's got to be this way, and whether we say it's changed or not, I think for the most part there are still some very strong things that men don't sit there and talk to each other about. Okay.
So I would connect them to a grief therapy or counseling or support network, maybe going to a nutrition site, maybe counting on their friends, going to a senior center.
But we have to wind this up. I'm sorry
okay.
to cut you off. The last thing, I guess, is to say that, like Phyllis said, there are no constants. People are still thinking about it. I mean, people are still engaging in sexual activities. People are interested in the issues relating to it, and it's about time that people start caring about the seniors and their issues. And I guess that's all I really have to say. That's it for What's Up With That. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. See ya. Bye-bye.